So we've talked about every other crime basically has a beginning and the ending, except perhaps murder and a sex offense. And in both cases, oddly enough, there's a great deal of variety. For example, you can have premeditated murder where you're planning to kill somebody, and then you can have, an accidental murder, right? Which is involuntary manslaughter or something like that. Um, to the public, sometimes there is not much of a difference. And just like there's not much of a difference with a so-called sex offense, we say so-called, which causes the vigilantes and the trolls to go absolutely ballistic, and they lump everything together. As far as they're concerned, this channel exists just to sort of be an apologist for what happened and to kind of cover up what I supposedly did. Well, again, there are people like me who did absolutely nothing, who didn't try to have sex with a child, and it doesn't matter. Remember, for 30 years, I had every opportunity and didn't do it. And of course, uh, as I told the judge, you would have everybody believe I suddenly one day lost my mind and decided I would go after a child, even though I've got schools all around me over here and everything. Never once did that. And of course, there's been no incident since then, because, of course, that's not what I was doing. And I'm on to the police game. And I'm sharing that with everyone else, along with my colleagues around the country in our network, attempting to demonstrate what it is police are doing and how dangerous it is. And so when we're talking about some of these cases, there are several that have to do with vigilantism across the country I'm going to focus on. There's one where there was a young man who is a foreigner in North Florida, and he admitted he was showing up to have sex with a minor. And when he showed up, the article doesn't go into a lot of detail, and I'm not going to mention names and everything because I have a more specific purpose. You've got vigilantes who set upon this guy, four guys, beat him up. He ran into a Circle K, which is, like a Wawa or gas station where you can buy food, etc. And where there's a lot of traffic, obviously, and reported what happened. They called the police. The police came, and of course, they arrested him, but they did nothing to the vigilantes. In fact, the police officer, commander, deputy sheriff, whatever he was, interviewed, said, well, you vigilantes got to be careful because these guys are really dangerous. They carry weapons a lot of times. Of course, nothing about not taking vigilantism into your own hands because it's illegal. Nothing about, vigilante justice and, vigilantes like Ghost CC Unit ruining cases that are legitimate because of their interference. And we're going to talk about why they do these things, three reasons people do these things, right? And then we have another one very similar to it in Indiana, where a supposed relative of the victim went to the motel where the person who had perpetrated the crime was staying after his release from prison because they very often have many restrictions, and gunned the man down, knocked on the door, man came out, he was shot dead. And of course, there was no excuse for that. The guy's up on murder. Even the police can't excuse that. Then we have a case out in Bend, Oregon, that I've talked about several times on this channel. And this is a man who was released from prison sometime, many years, I think, before he had been convicted of a crime. There was a real victim, and he, as in all three of these cases so far, right? There was a real victim, and he came out of prison, and he was in a Safeway, a grocery store, and there was a gunman, and he started shooting. And everybody, of course, ran and hid. But this particular man, for whatever reason, engaged the gunman and killed, if I remember correctly, the story, he killed the gunman, but he himself was killed. And everybody was very, very grateful about this brave soul who went after him, and they started investigating this registered sex offenders background because they wanted to, maybe put a statue in the public square, do something to commemorate it. And of course, as soon as they found that he had committed a sex offense, the interest in collecting money for this particular commemoration dried up, no interest, because, of course, he was a dirty, rotten sex offender, supposedly. Of course, nobody else engaged the gunman. And this man saved many, many people's lives and sacrificed his own. But of course, that was overshadowed by the three little words sex, internet, and child. Um, and that's unfortunate. We should be enough advanced in our society that we can see both. We can see why we need to protect our children and also not engage in perpetual punishment where there's no possibility of redemption or healing in any sort. All right. It just doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, we have the number of times that I've been attacked just in the last 48 hours by vigilantes online, and the number of online attacks that people who are forced to register have to engage in. Very rarely do you get these cases I just talked about in person because you have all these brave trolls and keyboard warriors who want to call you names. And in the last 48 hours, I've been attacked, I don't know how many times. And of course, they point out insignificant things in the video and we ignore the larger bit of it. Like in the video where I show whistleblowers who have both forensic analysts of one sort or another who are reporting what the police are doing. In fact, they're reporting that evidence is being tampered with in order to gain conviction. So remember what I said at the outset. You never know what these people were really guilty of. Okay? Guilty as a matter of law is not the same as being really guilty of doing something with a child or attempting to do something with a child. And that's very important. That's why, Christians supposedly believe in non-judgment. Why is that a good thing? Because you don't really know what the backstory is. You don't really know. And it's very, very challenging to get out there in the world and deal with people because we all judge and we compartmentalize. We're trying to figure out the world. We're trying to understand the world. And we go and we do these judgments. And very often our judgments are wrong. So why do these vigilantes do what they do? Well, they do it basically for three reasons. Number one is they do it for revenge. Okay. You want to go after somebody. You want to feel that they haven't paid because the pain is ongoing in the people that they have harmed. And it's definitely the case. The pain very often is ongoing. We had a situation here in Virginia in the last legislative assembly or the one before it, I forget which, where they were looking at reducing mandatory minimums and allowing people for capital crimes to get out of prison early and even go on parole, which has always been very controversial here in Virginia. The parole program is virtually non-existent because of the great desire to see people rot in prison, which of course costs us all a lot of money. The person could be out there, they could be earning money, they could be paying taxes, they could be redeeming themselves for what they did. But of course, uh, nothing I saw when I lobbied at the General Assembly was more heart-wrenching than the hours and hours and hours of testimony of people who had lost loved ones who just wanted revenge. They just wanted the person to stay in prison. They wanted them to continually suffer in prison because they had lost their loved one. And of course, I pointed out they're not healed, and the person who is in prison is not healed. Nobody wins anything here. Okay. No amount of pain, no amount of vengeance is going to bring the other person back. It's not going to undo. It has to be done up here. That's where the undoing happens. So the second reason, aside from vengeance, is the idea of significance. I'm going to look good as a great guy, and it's usually men, if I'm going to stand up for the virtue of somebody who is a child and it's never really a woman necessarily. It's never really, anti corruption vigilantes or even anti Yeah, grand larceny I've talked about, which is out of control, people stealing cars and stuff like that. They're never interested in that. It's always having to do with sex. Okay, that's what's really interesting. The idea of I'm going to be significant by going after these people. I'm going to look good, and they always hide their identity, right? And I've engaged a number of these groups at various times. I went before the Arizona Predator Prevention people because I wanted to find out why they were doing what they were doing. We never really got to that because after 3 hours of fielding all their questions where they thought they had me over a barrel, a number of them quite decently at the end said, this is not something that we typically get. I mean, this guy might be telling the truth. And of course, other people went bananas on their trolls because said that I had them over a barrel and I had pulled the wool over their eyes and all this other stuff. That's not true. All I did was tell the truth. And I tried to explain how these situations are more nuanced a lot of times than people realize. All right. So there is a desire to grab significance to themselves, that I feel good when I'm doing something that I can reliably know that the society that I'm supposedly a part of here is on my side. Okay. And nobody's going to give me any attention if I go after, people who steal groceries or welfare fraud or tax evasion or or grand larceny because that's not, if you pardon the term, sexy enough. Okay. And the third reason vigilantes do their things, remember, we have vengeance, we have significance. The third reason is latent guilt. One of the things that we are noticing over and over again with a number of vigilante groups is that they actually have a rap sheet far worse than anybody they're attacking. Very often, and again, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying everybody, but very often, they have had criminal backgrounds. They have had skirmishes with the law. They have had issues with addiction and with use of controlled substances and difficult families where they have had a lot of trouble connecting with people and building relationships. And they just can't seem to get out of their own way sometimes. And these people often are in a position too, I shouldn't say often, but sometimes are in a position where they themselves, we find out later, have committed crimes. And very often they're in positions of power and significance beyond just being vigilantes. So they might be somebody who has a popular podcast, as we've seen. There might be people who are in positions of power, like state senators or like city council people. We had two mayors in two adjacent counties here in Virginia who, years apart, were convicted of child pornography. Okay. And these are people who are supposed to be cleaning up this stuff in their communities. So we have this incredible um, uh, perversion of guilt, turning it on its heads, where they feel very, very bad inside for their own latent desires or what they have done or what they want to do. And so they project that out as, the good guy. They're going to clean up the streets. And in fact, they have, you know, a lot of images on their computer and a lot of secret desires that they are not attending to. They're not getting counseling for. They're not looking into because, of course, if you go to a counselor, they very often are forced to report what you are doing. So there really isn't much of an avenue for dealing with that appetite out there. So, the desire for significance and looking good, the desire for revenge, and the desire for, dealing with this guilt by projecting the good guyness out there, and they can never get away from themselves. And eventually it does come out. So these are the situations that we have out there. And I want to end with one particular case here that I'm going to share of a young man. I shouldn't say young man, I guess, a man in my area here in Virginia. And where vigilantism is what I might call soft vigilantism, where they go after this guy who's never really done anything wrong after his initial conviction. He is not. He was what's called a tier three here in Virginia, which means that he is barred from by law from going on a campus where students are. Okay, for so there's three tiers in Virginia, 15 years, tier one, which is a tier that doesn't have as many restrictions. You're basically on the list where they're monitoring you for 15 years. You have a tier two where you did something with someone, older child, or you took some more substantive steps according to the law, and that's 25 years. And if you're on a tier three, though, it's the worst tier, and there's a big gap between tier two and tier three. Tier threes have to register not annually, they have to re-register every month now. They are barred from going on school properties, for example. They're barred from going on places where there are a lot of students, like state parks and other places. There's a lot more restrictions on that. So I want to share with you what happened in this particular case with a guy who had been going on uh, a place where his wife works, a private school, which does not have the same level of restriction. But if you get a court order, you are allowed to be on there. And this person did not get a court order claiming that the rules were confusing. And I'm not sure I believe that necessarily, but he didn't do anything wrong either. So update, sex offender charge after being, quote, allowed on private school campus in Fauquier. Fauquier is a county. You can see that a couple days ago. Here's the person in question. So it says the sex offender was allegedly allowed on campus. It's funny how they use allegedly here. That was actually a fact. He was allowed on campus at a Christian school for years. So there were no troubles for years. It only began to be a problem. Here is the Virginia code that says that you're not allowed to do that. He had a class six felony, which is the lowest felony, and he's now being held without bond. And he's being charged with being on this campus, even though he didn't do anything wrong. Okay. So he said that no additional details were available on this. Prior to the arrest, concerns had been mounting among parents here. One particular parent who recognized him from the sex offender registry. Now, how would they recognize him? Well, they're apparently hanging out on this registry all the time, right? They're making sure that they spend a lot of time on there because they want to see what's going on in their community. Of course, it turns out, as it does here, in a revenge group where they get other parents involved and they're screaming, yelling, and hollering. And this person has been there for years. Okay. 4 years. It sparked a discussion about child safety, legal compliance, and communication practices. So they're angry with the school that the school did not tell them. Okay. She said she spoke with a senior trooper, CJ Horner, who I'm familiar with as well, and he confirmed that the person had been given verbal permission, not written permission, but verbal permission that allowed him allowed him access to the school property. Okay. And now charges have been brought against him because, of course, people were complaining. What were they complaining about? That he was recognized on a public registry. Okay. He had been charged with having sex with somebody. And listen to this part. He was charged in 2004. Okay. So when he was very, very young, so 20 years ago, 21 years ago, okay, he was charged stemming from a 2000 offense. So 25 years ago of carnal knowledge with a child. So he would have been a very young man at that time. Okay. He received a 3-year sentence with most of the time suspended, 2 years of supervised probation where apparently he didn't have any violations, right? He had been allowed on campus. His wife worked there as a teacher. Okay. So there was no court order that was filed for him to be there, but he did receive permission. So he sought and received permission. They didn't hide this. Okay. This wasn't coming from an incident. Okay. They said they located a court order for another RSO married to a former teacher, and that had been obtained 6 months before the wife was, Lundy's wife was employed. Okay. And so they wondered why the same legal process hadn't been. Well, there are certain discrepancies there, but I'm not sure she's right on that. But the point of it is he hadn't done anything except his time for the crime, which occurred again 25 years earlier. Okay. Now he was required to register as a tier three, which means he's on the registry for life. Okay. So this woman who and her family making all this aggravation and trouble here, they withdrew their son who was in Lundy's wife's class for 2 years. Again, no trouble. The board, of course, has a lot of headaches because parents are up in arms. And now uh, they said that the individual should have had a court order, but really, does anybody believe that that would have made any difference at all? Okay. The board said they had followed all the rules and there were no safety concerns. So again, soft prejudices and soft vigilantism. Okay. So we have this person, this parent who's looking at the sex offender registry, which is public registry, connecting the person's face with somebody. And how would she recognize this? She must have been looking for someone. She must have been scanning through it. So here they created a situation that wasn't a situation. Okay. So the question is, at what point does healing occur? And the answer is it's not allowed to occur at all. Vigilantes and trolls have no interest at all in healing. They're interested in revenge. And that's fine if they would simply admit that that's what they're interested in, but they don't. Okay. They don't. Very often these folks are Christian. Very often these folks will tell me that they're good people and that these other people are bad people. And the entire world, in their view, where sex offenders are concerned, are black and white. Everything else is a little gray, but black and white. And again, very often we find out that they don't have the most sterling backgrounds either. So it's just kind of interesting when you talk to probation officers as well. They will often tell you, well, probation rules are you don't know you can't have sex with anybody without telling us. You can't adults. You got to report all that to them. They say you can't drink, you can't smoke because you can't do drugs because these things cause problems. In my case, I said, fine, that's not a problem. I don't do any of those things anyway, and my sex life is really none of your business anyhow. But do the profile that they put out there works for the extreme person, but is not true of most people out there that are in the online sex things that people that police craft around you. So again, one size doesn't fit all, but what does fit all is a need for redemption and a need for moving away from this perpetual punishment, which people seem to want. This is Norman Michael Asian with ICAC Unpacked. Have a good day.